In this lecture, we will discuss the equity theory of motivation. The bottom line about equity theory is that pretty much all of us believe that life should be fair. Of course, we know that it often isn't, and that's what this theory is about, actually, is when it sometimes is not. It's an innate concept. If you would like to watch, there's a YouTube video which demonstrates with some small primates the concept of fairness. So at least in primate and higher species, fairness seems to be an innate or genetically encoded concept or belief that we all have. The key question for us to ask is fairness essential in a police organization? If the end of government, as Madison said in Federalist 51, is justice, and that police organizations in their communities play an important role in achieving justice, can a police organization achieve justice in the community if there's not justice or fairness within the organization? The equity theory of motivation was first developed by Stacey Adams in 1963. That stream of literature has grown into a concept known as organizational justice. And those dimensions are procedural, in which people form judgments about whether or not the processes that influence them are fair. Are hiring, promotional, disciplinary processes fair? We also look at distributive justice. Are the outcomes fairly distributed and based upon merit? Interpersonal justice is another factor that we seek. We want individuals to treat one another fairly. And then informational justice. We want information to be evenly distributed and available for us when we need it. Some of the considerations are that there are positive organizational outcomes related to high levels of organizational justice. And that we know, and we'll study more deeply in Area 3 about in extremis leadership, that people, most especially when their lives are at stake, want to be treated fairly. And we know that police legitimacy, perceptions of legitimacy in the community, is strongly related to procedural justice. If people believe they're treated fairly by the police in the field, they believe that the police are a legitimate governmental force, and it increases the likelihood that they'll voluntarily comply with the law. We look at a comparison ratio in equity theory. And the first thing that we need to consider is the self and then the comparison other. Each of us examines our world both from our perspective, and then we look at other people's experiences in that world. Of course, the self is yourself. The comparison other is the person that you compare yourself to. We also think about our inputs. How hard do we work? And how smart are we? How educated are we? How physically fit are we? Or any number of factors that influence performance we think of as inputs. Outcomes are basically rewards. Do we get hired? Do we get promoted? Do we get pay raises? Those are the typical rewards in organizations. And this comparison ratio is essentially we can look at it as almost a mathematical ratio of two fractions. On the top of the fraction, on the numerator, we look at inputs, and we look at individual inputs on the left of yourself. And you also weigh those against individual outcomes. So when you look at your personal situation in the workplace, you think about, well, what do I put into it? How hard do I work? How good am I at it? And then what are my outcomes? Do I get the pay raises I think that are commensurate with my inputs? Do I get the promotions, assignments, whatever the case may be? And the fairness is our assessment of how our ratio on the left compares to another person's ratio. So we look at someone else and we look at how capable they are, how hard they work, physically fit they may be, or whatever the case may be, and what their outcomes are. And if we don't believe that that this ratio is fair, then we perceive an inequity, where we believe that we put more into the situation than perhaps another person, and that we get less out of the situation. And again, it's viewed from the perspective of the individual and based entirely on the individual's perception, as opposed to the leader's perception. Now, the critical point being that a person can perceive something, and that perception can obviously be accurate or inaccurate. Now, if we perceive an inequity in the workplace, we engage in resolution strategies. We want to somehow make the situation fair. One of the most common is called altering inputs. In the kind of colloquial phrase, if you're going to pretend to pay me, I'll pretend to work. So if we look around us and we see that we're working harder and that we're not getting as much out of the situation as those we compare ourselves to, then we can alter inputs. Say, well, I'll make my inputs commensurate with whatever my outcomes are going to be. We can now alter outcomes. If we're working extra hard and we see other people working not so hard, they seem to be getting at least the same that we're getting or more, we can go to our boss and we can ask for a raise. Say, look, I need a raise. I'm working harder, but I'm not getting as much as other people, or give me a promotion or another assignment, or whatever the case may be. We want our outcomes to be commensurate with what we put into it. We can change attitudes. We can kind of cognitively distort the situation where we say, well, I don't really value the outcome that those other people get anyway, or that we can cognitively distort our inputs. We may probably the most common one example I can think of that in policing is the number of people I know who promotional tests were taken simply just to see what it was all about. After the third or fourth time somebody's just seeing what the sergeant's test is all about, it tends to kind of ring untrue. So very often we'll try to just cognitively distort the situation. We can change the comparison other. We may sometimes compare ourselves to people that we really shouldn't. It's hard to compare outside of your organization. And there's been a lot of research in equity theory, in particular in sports teams and baseball teams. And the principal finding there has been that people tend to look within their teams, that's where they want equity, comparing inputs and outcomes. And they recognize that perhaps they shouldn't look outside of their own club. And likewise, within your organization, it's hard to know exactly what the situation is in another organization, and comparing yourself to someone in that other organization may not be as accurate as you may think. Acting on the comparison other, the most common example of this is what occurs in manufacturing organizations, and it's sometimes called rate busting. A new employee comes on the shop floor, and if the minimally accepted level of performance is 25 widgets an hour, and this new eager employee starts stamping out 30 widgets an hour, his or her coworkers could make it known to him that it's probably not a wise thing to do to work extra hard. You may come out to the parking lot and find your tire slashed. Other things like that sometimes occur in some settings where they do what's called rate busting. So that's a common situation in manufacturing organizations. Finally, is leaving the field. You may just decide, well, there's no way I can get more out of the situation. They're not going to promote me. They're not going to give me a pay raise. I'm not comfortable with not working as hard or as well as I possibly can. So the thing for me to do is to find an organization where I can work as hard or as well as I think I can and should, and that organization will fairly compensate me for it. So those are the resolution strategies that an individual may engage in. Now, obviously, all of those can be problematic in an organization. So what we want to do as a leader is we want to somehow restore the perception of equity. And that's what we want to do. So we want to restore the perception of equity. And again, one of the key points is that that perception may be inaccurate. Which, as a leader, leads us to the strategy of correcting that misperception. Now, how are we going to do that? Again, decide whether or not it's perception or reality. If it's a perception or a misperception, then we need to correct that misperception. If it's reality, it can be very challenging in the organization. But somehow or another, we have to, reverse any of those bad resolution strategies, if at all possible. The other factor to consider is that related to equity theory is that, especially lower in the organization, leaders may not have the power to deal with unfair or inequitable outcomes. But even if you try, that will probably gain you additional credibility with a follower, and while you may not be able to rectify the inequitable situation, as a leader, you're perhaps going to have greater influence with that individual if you try. I'm not saying it's easy in many organizations, but if you try to correct an inequity, that'll increase your level of credibility. Now that too could wear thin. After the third or fourth time someone believes they've been treated unfairly, and you try to correct it and can't, there's going to be a limit on how much credibility that might give you.